Hello there, little masters, and welcome to the Prancing Pony podcast, where tonight, Shawn and I are looking forward to more than enough speech and merriment to rival an elf party in the woody end.
And we'll step into the common room here in just a moment. But first, I'm Shawn Marchese, the real-life Lord of the Mark, and I'm here with the man of the West, who, just like Frodo, gets cranky when you ask him too many questions before breakfast, Alan Sisto.
Well, you didn't even want to leave me any breakfast, so don't blame me.
Fair enough.
All right, well, thank you, Shawn. Yeah, well, you know, Pippin, Shawn, same guy.
Hey, I don't know how I feel about that, actually.
I do.
I mean, I know we've admitted that he's cleverer than we give him credit for, but he's still Pippin.
Yeah, he's kind of snarky and... No, I don't.
Yeah, no, okay, yeah, no, I see where you're going with that. Okay.
Yeah. I was just on that particular intro piece where you're, telling me that I'm cranky before breakfast, which is true.
Snarky young whippersnapper.
That's right. Kids these days, get off my lawn.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, like I was trying to say before Shawn interrupted me again, we are proud to welcome several of our patrons to the Old Inn of Bree for some unscripted Q&A. And we have several of our patrons online with us, and we've asked them to come with some of their very best questions. Now, as always, we have no idea what they're going to ask us, so Shawn and I are going to be answering questions on the fly, as best we can, in our 5th ever Questions After Nightfall episode.
So I'll start once again by invoking the name of the gatekeeper in Bree, old Harry Goatleaf, whose name I've just realized sounds like one of Bart Simpson's prank calls to Moe's Tavern.
Sure does.
We'll leave that there for now.
Yeah, we'll come up with something next time.
I'm sure. So yes, it's our guest's business to ask questions, and it's our business to answer them.
That's right, but we make no promises as far as accuracy is concerned.
No.
As with previous Questions After Nightfall episodes, aside from any possible edits for nervous coughs or time spent flipping through pages as we look for an answer, we intend to present this just as it was recorded live. So everything you hear in this show will have been recorded during this session.
And if you'd like to get in on the next one, go check out our Patreon page at patreon.com/prancingponypod. Mm-hmm. We'll be doing Questions After Nightfall episodes about every quarter, and we'll be inviting patrons at the Elrond's Honorarium tier and higher to join us.
That's right. It's just one of the many ways we're saying thank you to our patrons, giving them the opportunity to stump us, make us laugh, utterly humiliate us, or maybe just get to know us a little better. So
they've earned the right.
That they have.
To humiliate us.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Without further ado, we're going to go ahead and introduce each of them. I'm going to unmute you in order, so look for your mic symbol to be unmuted. And when that happens, go ahead and say hi to your fellow podcast listeners. Let them know your first name and where you're joining us from tonight.
Hi, this is Emily, and I am joining you from Austin, Texas.
Very good. Good to have you back. Next up is James.
Hi, it's James Riley from Gloucester, Virginia.
Good to have you back, sir.
Welcome back, James.
And hailing from the far north, DeMay.
Hi, this is DeMay from beautiful earthquake-free Fairbanks, Alaska. Happy to be back.
Happy to have you, as always.
Thank you, DeMay.
And Tim.
Hi there, this is Tim. I'm here in Madison, Wisconsin.
Good to have you with us again, Tim. And welcome, Nick.
Hello, this is Nick from Atlanta, the Mordor of America.
Hotlanta. Good to have you with us, Nick. You're joining us for the first time tonight, so we're very much looking forward to having you be a part of this.
Welcome, Nick.
Ed.
Hey, this is Ed, and I'll take humiliation for 500, Alan.
Ding, 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 ding. Double Jeopardy. What do you know?
Double Jeopardy for us.
Well, right. It's always double Jeopardy for us because there's two of us. Well, thank you, Ed. All right, folks.
Welcome, everyone. Great to have you all here.
Yes, absolutely. And shall we go ahead and just get started with the questions?
Yeah, so let's see. I
saw Tim's hand first.
I see Tim's hand up first.
All right.
So why don't we go ahead and start with you, Tim?
Oh, thank you. Well, I'm excited as we get closer and closer to Tom Bombadil. He's one of my favorite characters in all of Legendarium. And I've long pondered who he was and what his meaning was, and I've read reams of theories and analysis online, and I finally found the last time I was getting excited and looking online, I looked in the letter 144, and he talks about how he wrote him specifically to be an enigma, and how all of us as readers tend to go down that rabbit hole, and he makes it such a wonderful journey. But then later in the letter, he talks about Tom Bombadil and says, Tom Bombadil is not an important person to the narrative. I suppose he has some importance as a comment. I mean, and he goes on to talk about how his real role is to show that there is other ways of thinking about the world than control, whether control that's geared towards the right, or good, or for the bad. There are other ways of living your life, in trying to be in peace and without focusing on power and control. But he also talks about how that is only able to maintain itself as long as there's enough good in the world to stand against evil. And it doesn't seem like he's making any kind of a judgment that being a pacifist is wrong or bad, but that it necessitates a certain amount of good that's willing to make sure that there is something worth having, focusing on, or enjoying. And I would really love to get your guys' input on your thoughts on Tom Bombadil, and if you can comment on that letter 144 at all, now or down the road, I'd really appreciate it.
Well, I think we could probably do it now. Shawn, why don't I go ahead? I've got the text pulled up in front of me. Why don't I read the actual paragraph that he's referring to, and then that way we'll have kind of a good launching off point to discuss. What do you think?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay. So this is, like you said, it's from letter 144. This was to Naomi Mitchison. And if I can scan back real quickly, this was written in 1954. She had been reading page proofs of the first 2 volumes and wrote to him with a number of questions. And so as it comes to Tom Bombadil, Tolkien says, Tom Bombadil is not an important person to the narrative. I suppose he has some importance as a comment. I mean, I do not really write like that. He is just an invention who first appeared in the Oxford magazine about 1933. And he represents something that I feel important, though I would not be prepared to analyze the feeling precisely. I would not, however, have left him in if he did not have some kind of function. I might put it this way. The story is cast in terms of a good side and a bad side. Beauty against ruthless ugliness. Tyranny against kingship. Moderated freedom with consent against compulsion that has long lost any object save mere power, and so on. But both sides, in some degree, conservative or destructive, want a measure of control. But if you have, as it were, taken a vow of poverty, renounced control, and take your delight in things for themselves without reference to yourself, watching, observing, and to some extent knowing, then the question of the rights and wrongs of power and control might become utterly meaningless to you, and the means of power quite valueless. It is a natural pacifist view, which always arises in the mind when there is a war. But the view of Rivendell seems to be that it is an excellent thing to have represented, but that there are in fact things with which it cannot cope, and upon which its existence nonetheless depends. Ultimately, only the victory of the West will allow Bombadil to continue, or even to survive. Nothing would be left for him in the world of Sauron. Well, there you go.
Yeah.
That really is a great paragraph.
Yeah, and a very full explanation of what Tom represents from a literary perspective, not what he is or his nature or anything like that. Yeah,
that's a good point. And it's something that we'll have to really dive into in terms of detail and comparison when we do get to that chapter. But I think it's fair to say that we can discuss that here. What do you think? How do you want to tackle this one?
Well, I think I don't know. That's such a good paragraph that says so much about what Tom represents to the story, and that's why I say that about it. It really kind of answers the question of the literary purpose, the narrative purpose that Tom serves.
Right.
And the
he may not be important to the
serves.
narrative, but he serves a function, and then he goes into detail about that function. So I guess that's the first thing, is to say, let's not take this out of context. When he says Tom Bombadil's not an important person, that doesn't mean what it sounds like it means.
Right. It doesn't mean he's not an important person within Middle-earth.
Right.
And
he's just not an important person to furthering the story.
To this story. I mean, we would believe if Middle-earth is a real place, and it is, a secondary world that we treat as real, then you've got to believe that there are all sorts of stories happening all the time. And we just happen to read this one. Yeah.
And it becomes, because for a moment it's tangential to our story.
Right.
It intersects it briefly, and then it's not.
Right. So. And that's one of the things that makes Tolkien's world feel so real, is that there are these characters that enter, sort of walk on the stage and then disappear. And that makes it feel like the world is much bigger.
Yeah. And they seem fully formed with, all sorts of story behind them, even if we don't know what that story may be. Yeah.
And with Tom, we've got the great benefit of the fact that Tom Bombadil was a character Tolkien had already created. As you said, you read from that letter, he had actually written poems about him that had been published as early as 1933. And so this character just sort of worked his way in. He already had a backstory, or some backstory, in Tolkien's mind when he was introduced. And so that's why he kind of feels real, because he did already exist in Tolkien's mind. He didn't just kind of, invent him out of thin air. So I think that's one really important thing, is it's sort of Tom's presence sort of makes the world feel bigger. And he just doesn't happen to be important to this particular story. I would say, from the perspective of what Tolkien talks about in this paragraph about, a good side and a bad side, beauty against ruthless ugliness. And Tom represents, this person who's just sort of taken a vow of poverty, renounced all power, basically
control,
sort of not taking sides, although he is still on the side of good, but he's just not, entering this particular battle. I kind of see that the way that, we've talked, which chapter was it? I think it was at the beginning of Three is Company. It's probably episode 103, when we were talking about the idyllic landscape of the Shire that you see the hobbits walk through.
Yeah.
And you need to see the beauty of the Shire and all these really long, detailed descriptions of the landscape and things like that. You have to see that to contrast with the war that you're going to see later on, and to kind of understand what's, what they're fighting for. And I think of Tolkien, those contrasts are always so important in Tolkien. He always likes to define things by contrast, or illustrate things by contrast, at least.
Yeah, it's the light and dark thing. We talked about that with Dr. Flieger and how, exactly. The light and dark are always going to be that initial comparison, but then everything else falls under that in terms of an A and B contrast. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And so
even even these lines, beauty, ruthless ugliness, tyranny, kingship. These are some great phrases, and I love the way he's characterized this story.
They are A and B, aren't they? They're all
totally incompatible.
Thesis, antithesis, each one of those. Yeah.
A man of antitheses, absolutely.
Right. But then Tom actually represents a person who is outside of that still. So even that, beauty against ugliness, tyranny against kingship, those are opposites. But as they strive against one another, that is a battle. And Tom is the opposite of that battle. Tom is the opposite of that desire to fight for power. So and so I think he's sort of a contrast to that.
Exactly, and that's why Tolkien draws that comparison to the natural pacifist view.
Yeah.
And like Tim said, Tolkien's not criticizing or praising a pacifist view. He's saying that there's some value to it, right? The view of Rivendell is that this is an excellent thing to have represented, but then we have to acknowledge its weak points, that there are things with which it cannot cope. It can't deal with this scope of a war, and yet its existence depends on the outcome of that war.
Because only the good guys winning will allow Bombadil to continue to exist. Yeah,
exactly.
The good guys still need to win for life to go on. Yeah. But I like the fact that he says this pacifist view always arises in the mind when there is a war, because it is when the mind is surrounded by the imagery of war or the experience of war that one starts to think about these pacifist views, starts to think about what the world could be like if it was not in the midst of war. And again, we've got a pair of antitheses there.
Yeah. And it's interesting because Tom does seem to have this little, Tom exists in a bubble in a way, right? I mean, he not only in his own domain, but in his own almost reality. That's why the ring doesn't have any influence on him. He can see Frodo when he has it on, and he can put it on and nothing happens to him. He disappears to Frodo, but he doesn't have any, he's not suckered by the ring into saying, I can't give it back. He lives in this kind of separate world, and you almost have to see that Tolkien's saying that this pacifism is not, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't want to say naive, maybe not even uninformed. That sounds insulting, but unaware that it can't cope with those things, right? I mean, Tolkien says here that there are some things with which it cannot cope. I also think there's something to be said for the idea that Tom doesn't even realize he can't cope with that, right? His viewpoint is so different, so out of the box, that it doesn't even occur to him that he has to take a side, because he can't. His nature won't allow him to. And that's okay. Maybe. As long as the right side wins, he gets to keep existing. Yay.
Maybe, but I would
I don't
say
know.
that I don't know if that's naivete or if it's just found another way to exist.
There you go.
Another
That may be
to
a way of
exist
putting it.
that is sort of parallel.
I wasn't trying to
to
insult Tom or pacifists for that matter. I mean,
I know that. But no, I mean, I think it's it's a naivete, I guess, in a sense, but I don't know. I see it as just a detachment.
There you go.
And
That's probably the better way to put it.
And detachment can be a good thing.
Yes, it can.
So
it can. Earlier, though, and I hope she still has a comment, I saw DeMay's hand on this. DeMay, you want to jump in real quick?
Yeah, it was something Tim said back at the beginning of this conversation that just triggered a thought in my head. I'm old. I'm really old. So I'm coming at this from a much more prosaic perspective of just a human living life.
Sure.
And, people float in and out of our lives all the time and make these huge impressions on us, even though we don't know their story. We don't get to learn the end of their story or even the beginning of their story. But at that particular moment in time, they were really vital to the way we thought. And when Tim started talking, I started thinking about people that I had met over the years that have really made an impression on me. And all of a sudden I got a new appreciation for Tom, that he may just be an interesting person with an interesting story. And these guys were at the stage in their life, the Hobbits, that's who these guys are.
Right.
We're at a stage in their life where they were receptive to hearing his story, even though they don't understand his future and his past. And it just was enough to trigger a moment in their lives. I'm just thinking about whenever they were going home and Gandalf goes off to visit Tom and leaves them behind to return on their own. And he says, they said, wow, I'd really like to talk to him again. And I just think, man, there's so many people that I wish I had more time to talk to that have passed in and out of my life. That's all I want to say.
That's a beautiful thing to say.
Fantastic, DeMay. Thank you for that.
That really is. That's a wonderful insight.
Because we've all had those experiences, haven't we? You meet somebody on a train, at an airport, in passing, and just somebody can have an impact on your life, or you're friends with them for, a few months, a year. Yeah, I think I really like the way you put that the hobbits were receptive, and Tom Bombadil was the person or the entity that they needed to meet at that moment just to have a certain effect on them. I really like that.
I agree. Emily, it looks like you want to pop in as well. And Tim, I've got your hand, so I'm going to come back to you to wrap up the question.
I agree. Deme, that's a beautiful idea, a thought, and it strikes me that they meet Tom before they even get to Rivendell, and they're at a place where they're at the cusp of this amazing adventure, and this is a chance for them to have, I don't know, this kind of this meaningful discussion, this something that kind of takes them out for a moment of where they're going to go, which I think is, I mean, I'll talk about it when I have my question, but it's just a very it's a big moment, and I think it is in view of all the stuff, that comes after, to have something that isn't the stuff, to show that is also a part of existence,
to show that there are still other things out there that are not touched by this war. Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah, that's great.
Good stuff. Thank you, Emily. I have to say, there's one thing that I want to mention from a literary perspective, from a story writing perspective. I know he says he's not an important person to the narrative, etc. Part of me wants to think that that's a little bit of downplaying on Tolkien's part, that he doesn't want to acknowledge just the centrality that Tom plays in that early part, getting them out of the Barrow Downs. But I also wonder, since we found out that this letter was written when she was reading the proofs to the first 2 volumes, I wonder if he maybe hadn't come to the point that we learned that the blade that Mary used to stab at the back of the leg of the Witch King was so important, because we learn later that the blade was central to breaking that spell that knit his sinews to his will. I wonder if maybe he just hadn't even come up with that yet. I don't know. I'm thinking out loud there. That's what this show's about.
Possible.
This episode, not the show. But I wonder. I'd have to look that up. But that's just something that kind of crossed my mind.
That's possible. I mean, there would have been other ways where that Merry could have gotten that blade, but would they have been as compelling as
right? Well, we knew he got the blade here. My question is whether maybe Tolkien had not yet decided that it was so important
that the blade had that power.
And that maybe he became a little. This is a way of giving Tom a little more importance in the narrative, was by making the blade that Merry would use, central to the defeat of the Witch King. I don't know. It's a thought.
That's interesting.
It just sometimes interesting things come to my head. Sometimes really not interesting things come into my head.
That was a very dismissive sounding. That was interesting. I didn't mean it that way.
No, I know.
I actually mean it was interesting. Well, that's interesting, Alan.
I'm used to your dismissive comments. Don't worry about it. All right, Tim. How did we do? Is there anything you want us to touch on, or any response you have before we move on to the next question?
Well, I really loved your feedback, and obviously the comments of Demay and Emily as well. Yeah. I was hearing when you were speaking, I initially had been thinking in my head of like pacifist as if like an outside observer or a monk or or someone who's just observing time from a distance.
That's a good parallel. The monk idea, that kind of isolation, that kind of gets to what Shawn was talking about.
That's kind of what I was thinking of when I said detachment. Yeah, just sort of separating.
However, as you were talking, I just started to think about like how vitally active he was in the story, and all of a sudden something triggered in my head, thinking, the one place where you see, this kind of situation in the war experiences he would have been things like paramedics, war correspondents, people that have a different way of engaging the world around them, as doctors or as reporters, and get caught up in the maelstrom of life and still make live out their vocation or their calling, and are active in it, and just like a writer who would be crushed under a fascist regime, or a doctor who's able to freely choose his calling, it would be in a whole different place. And if his rights were taken away, it seems like all of a sudden this just bubbled into my head as something he might have experienced, people with just a different angle on life that he would have engaged with through these great battles that I think at least informed his writing, although not being allegory.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. No, that's a really cool observation too. The awareness that there are people who are vitally active, I think is how you put it, Tim, and I really like that. There are people who are vitally active in a war effort, even who are not fighting. That's really interesting, and I like that idea too. That might be something we'll explore too when we get to Tom.
Agreed. All right. Well, let's see. I have to scroll back up to the text box to see who we noticed was next. I think it was James.
I had James down next. I've actually got.
All right. Yeah, I've got James, then Demay, then Emily.
Then Demay, then Emily is what I've got on my list.
James, I've gone ahead and unmuted you right now, so fire away with whatever you have for us tonight.
Alrighty. My question is one of economics a little bit.
Uh-oh.
So,
Shawn, get out your calculator.
So there's been a couple, I know letters that went to Barlowman's bag about how much gold Bilbo actually brought back after his adventure.
Yes.
I think the last estimate was it figured out that he only had about 7 years worth of salary that he could live on.
Yeah.
Well, the thing I was thinking about though is that also would depend on what kind of economy the Shire actually has.
That's a very good point.
Because if they lived in a barter economy, then money would go a lot farther, or even like an egalitarian, where everybody are almost socialistic in a way, where coinage would go a lot farther if you have a service you can provide to cover your needs in a way. And somebody who might be somewhat aristocratic, in Bilbo's case, if he is a landlord, he wouldn't necessarily have to pay out a lot, because he could just take, for example, foodstuffs from the people who are growing, like the gaffer growing.
Instead of charging them rent, he would just charge them food, but then he's got his food and he doesn't need to use his money for food. Right.
Exactly my thought. So do we know anything about what kind of economy the Shire actually had?
Oh, wow, that is a good question, James. The text, of course, don't give us that answer, right? I mean, the closest we get is the parallel to, it's a Warwickshire village at the turn of the century, the Diamond Jubilee.
Right.
And that's really all we were able to draw from. And that's how we came to the conclusion that we did in terms of, well, with the help of our listeners,
one of whom is actually here with us right now.
Oh, that's right. I couldn't remember.
And has raised his hand. And I might just kick this over to him in just a moment. But
I think that's probably a good idea. I'm going to go ahead.
But I think
that is Ed.
Before we do that, Alan, I like where you were going with that. All we know about the Shire is that it is based on that sort of turn of the century work,
Victorian.
So and that's why we look to things like. I don't know. We've talked a little bit about, joked about it being Hobbiton Abbey and things like that. Ed, who sent us the last sort of analysis of the value of the coinage and who's here with us today, I think he was kind of looking to Jane Austen and things like that. So that's the kind of stuff we can look to because
certainly the right
doesn't
time
really
period.
give us any details.
No, and that's he does give us details about a lot of things, right? We've talked about this before.
True, yeah.
We don't understand the logistical supply chain for the troops in the Battle of the Pelennor Fields. We don't know, how much foodstuffs travel through the ports on the Anduin. We don't know any of the kind of detail that I think we would see if it were a modern writer tackling this.
Yeah. Sadly, Tolkien just wasn't interested in that stuff, and some of us are very interested in it.
I would like to know, but at the same time, I'm almost glad it's not there because I don't want to get distracted by that. When I'm reading the story, it's different when I'm analyzing it and when we're discussing it for the podcast. I'd love to have those details, but
there are some writers who you get so lost in the world building that there's really not much story there.
There's no more story.
I would not want to see that with Tolkien,
No, the world needs to serve. In fact, I kind of had this conversation, I think, with one of our listeners earlier. We were talking about characters and the nature of the characters versus the nature of the story. And I've always felt like the characters should serve the story, not the other way around. I know that there are others who think flip-flop, that the story needs to serve the characters, but it's the same thing with the world building. I think that needs to serve the story. And Tolkien does. He uses that world building to serve the story. He doesn't go overboard with it to the point that the world building becomes primary over the story itself. And I think that's what makes it work.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think that also contributes to making it feel more real because
absolutely.
When you read mythology, sometimes a fair bit about the culture that work of literature came from, but you don't usually know it from the mythological work itself.
Exactly.
You may know it from
mythology,
history or archaeology or other things, but to a certain degree, it is that kind of mystery of approaching a mythological work from a world you don't fully understand that I think Tolkien is trying to replicate here.
Absolutely. Well, before we keep talking ourselves into a hole, I'm going to bring Ed in since he's kind of our resident expert on this. Ed, I'm glad you're here tonight.
Hello. Yeah, I mean, I think we do know a couple of things. It is it is to a certain extent a money economy because there is money, right? I mean,
that's true.
They pay silver coins for the ponies and Bree, and he brings back gold, and it's probably, I don't know what it says coins, but it's certainly gold in a tradable form. They talk about a little bit about the economy in the Dale, Lonely Mountain, Long Lake kind of thing.
We also know there's one other thing that makes me think about there being an economy. There are lawyers whose sole job it is to define and work out who gets what and how.
Yeah, I mean,
Mr. Grubbs,
Chubb and Burrows, right?
Yeah, Grubbs, Chubb and Burrows. Yeah,
I think in the in the pre-modern world, you can't do a whole lot of trade, or you can't do a whole lot of manufacturing without some sort of money. There's a little bit you can do with barter, but not a lot. And I think the Shire has all sorts of consumer goods at Bilbo's house, right? In Bilbo's hole. They have to be manufactured by people, and that's a more complicated thing. And so I think you have to go with the
there's got to be some currency.
It's not the simplest kind of bartering for basic needs kind of thing.
Right, which would be which would be very, very just in all my reading of fiction, I only have met one author who wrote a series with sort of economics as an integral part of the series. It's actually quite good, and I would wax eloquent, but I won't. I just think that authors tend not to care so much about how the food is grown and where the shop makers make it, and make their things, and how trade goes on. Trade is just not a part of it, and I don't think Tolkien cared that much. about.
You're probably right.
Yeah.
But it's definitely a money economy, and I do think, Bilbo doesn't work, and there's no indication of a extensive banking system so that he would be investing money. So it's got to be his income to be wealthy has to be rents from land and land titles, and the Hobbits,
and that makes sense given the time period,
right?
Yeah. We talk about that turn of the century Warwickshire village. So you're talking about when somebody then says they have £500 a year, they're talking about income that they have every year that comes from their properties, from whatever they own, that's generating that revenue.
Yeah.
So
definitely.
One other sign, by the way, of a money economy. I remembered there was a quote about a penny, and I couldn't remember exactly where it was. And it had to do with the gifts, that he'd given out all these gifts. And at the end, there was no sign nor mention of money or jewelry. Not a penny piece or a glass bead was given away. So once again, we have a mention of a very specific currency. So definitely a money world, not a barter world.
Now, I will speculate one thing is I do not believe that the hobbits mint their own coins. I think they use the coins that have been minted either by the dwarves or that have been
probably by the Dunedain,
the North Kingdom,
the North Kingdom. That's what I'm thinking is they're old.
Well, and you saw that a lot in the early Middle Ages too. People of Europe using old Roman coins and things like that.
There are Roman coins that have been found in Japan, so that gives you an idea of that kind of trade routes that went on in the past, and the dwarves provide that kind of trading community in
that
Middle
they
Earth.
do.
Right, that's true. Yeah,
you're absolutely right.
That's all I had to say.
Well, very good, Ed. Thank you. That was some really good insight, and I'm glad you were here to provide it. Thank you. Well, James, before we move on, was there any follow up to that, or is there anything you wanted to say to close that question out?
No, that pretty much covered everything. I will say I'm reluctant to entirely agree, simply because lots of places, especially in the Middle Ages, had coinage, but it wasn't their primary method of barter and exchange or currencies, so to speak.
Okay.
A lot of times they would use it as, this is worth so much silver. However, I can agree. I'm just not sure I'm ready to yet.
I've been there. I can't tell you how many times Shawn will convince me of something. I'm like, yeah, you're probably right, but I'm not going to say that yet.
Not going to quite let go of it just yet. Not going to commit to it. Yeah, that's fair.
What was I'm thinking of genetic language transmission.
Yeah, the genetic transmission of language.
Took me forever to finally come around.
That took several episodes.
Fine.
Yeah.
I'm still
not sure. People are still
but...
emailing us about that.
Sending us that's the thing about creating evergreen content. People are going to be emailing us about that 5 years from now when they first come across that episode.
Yeah. 15 years from now, when the podcast is, completely done, you're going to get a tweet from somebody who's going to say, back in 2018, you said.
And my son, who is monitoring those for me since I'll be an old man, will be like, my father is retired.
He'll basically do the Christopher Tolkien thing. He'll be
there. You go.
He'll be managing all your old podcasts.
Oh goodness! The idea of having a literary executor is
that's the word.
Probably a little over the top. Oh goodness! Well, let's see, Demay. I believe you are next. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you, Demay. What do you have for us tonight?
Well, it's a fairly simple question. I'm keeping pace with your podcast on rereading the books. I'm not doing the Corey Olsen paragraph of the day. So I actually enjoy that quite a bit, but at the same time, I like this pace. It's good for me. Now, I was reading the section about Gandalf telling Frodo, you need a nom de plume, although he's not writing, an alias, as it were.
Right.
And he says, use the name Underhill. Why? Yeah. What is that about? Underhill? Is that because he lives under the hill at Bag Inn? Is it something else? I think it's a pretty straightforward question.
It does seem pretty straightforward.
Seriously, I was just reading that and I said, why Underhill? So that's my question for you guys.
Okay. Well, I'm going to go ahead and put you back on mute while we think about it. I think I already have an idea. What about you, Shawn?
You go first. because I've got a little idea, but I don't think it's a good one.
I'm trying to go. I'll have to take a look at. There we go. Here we go.
Thinking about the Hobbit?
No, I'm actually thinking going forward to chapter 10, Strider.
Okay.
I think the reason that Gandalf tells Frodo to go under that name is that he's already told Aragorn what name Frodo will be going under. We get this. Butterbur, and probably Aragorn as well. Because Butterbur says this, you know best, said the landlord knowingly. I won't give you away, but I was told that this Baggins would be going by the name of Underhill, and I was given a description that fits you well enough, if I may say so. And I suspect he might have also told Aragorn, but I can't confirm that. Yes. No, it's the letter again. It's Mr. Butterbur again. He says, leaving the letter aside, I promised Gandalf no less. Barley, he says to me, this friend of mine from the Shire, he may be coming out this way before long, him and another. He'll be calling himself Underhill. Well, now I just realized that must have been after he told him.
Well, and
Okay.
even if it wasn't, even if Gandalf had already decided to tell Frodo to call himself that, it still doesn't.
Then
answer
comes the question of why. Right.
Yeah,
No, I know. I was
why
going
did
to tackle that one next. I was just trying to come up with a practical reason.
I was like, okay.
I got to give us a starting point, right?
We got to start from somewhere. Well,
I was thinking that he told Strider that as well, but I'm not certain. I'm trying to find out that, because so far it's a lot of Butterbur. But yes.
Well, while you're looking for that, I will point out that in The Hobbit, Underhill, the term Underhill, once as a single word and twice hyphenated, is used 3 times.
Right.
So Bilbo is called Mr. Baggins of Bag End Underhill.
Yes.
Bag End is called Bag End Underhill. And then at the end, when Bilbo comes home, when it's the auction of all his worldly possessions, the name used in the official documents is Bilbo Baggins, Esquire of Bag End Underhill, Hobbiton. So
Underhill, yeah.
Underhill seems to be a key part of his address, which to me it seems like a very bad choice for an incognito.
Well, yeah, if you're trying to improve
handle.
privacy, you should just go by like Proudfoot.
Right, exactly,
You know?
as opposed to something that points to, the name of your house or the location of your house. Yeah, it's a very strange thing. It's almost as if I were to go abroad and call myself, Mr. Austin or something like that,
But I don't want anybody to know where I'm from.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
It is kind of a strange thing. So I get that there's significance to it because it's a direct link to where he's from, but why Gandalf chooses that as opposed to something completely different like Proudfoot or I don't know, something else totally different, that would not link it back. Mr. Brown, something that would just be completely sort of generic. I don't know.
I guess anything other than Baggins would probably be okay.
Except for the fact that Underhill is got to be
close.
so close
to
the concept of Bag End. Exactly. Yeah. But I guess if you went with something too generic, like Brown, like I just threw out, I mean, that's not a Hobbit name. People would never believe that, it has to be a Hobbiton name.
Yeah.
And I guess maybe it has to be.
Well, it just has to be a Shire name. Does Bilbo tell Gollum? Because remember, all of this information, all of the concerns are based on the information that Sauron has after torturing Gollum and getting information. What did Gollum know? Gollum knew Bilbo, he knew Baggins and he knew Shire.
True. He didn't know anything about Bag End Underhill.
He didn't know anything about Bag End.
I think Gandalf needed to pick a Hobbiton name because I think that Frodo would have sounded like.
I bet you're right.
Hobbiton
That's exactly. I bet there's
speaks.
A dialect issue that he must be. He's from over in the Hobbiton area.
And
he's not
people in Bree would know the
part of
difference. And we right. And we know that there were some of Sauron's guys in Bree, so they would have known the difference. So it couldn't be like a Marish name or probably even a Buckland name. It would have to be a Hobbiton name.
Yeah.
But that's all, I don't know. That's a tough one. And maybe it would have to be an aristocratic name too, because Frodo's going to speak like an aristocrat.
Yeah, he's going to speak like
he couldn't go by Gamgee
or
Cotton because people know that he doesn't.
He knows
talk
he's
like
not a farmer or he's not Maggot. By the way, I am confirming in Riddles in the Dark that he does tell Gollum that I am Mr. Bilbo Baggins. But I'm trying to see if he says anything about the Shire. I don't think he does. But eventually, of course, Gollum would have learned that from the men of Lake Town. So that's what Sauron would have learned. I don't know that I have any more than that. But I bet you're right. I mean, I think you touched on a number of factors. It needs to be a Hobbiton name, and it needs to be an aristocratic name. It can't be a common laborer's sort of name, because it simply doesn't talk that way. And you're right. In Bree, he's so close that for sure the hobbits would know that it was not an accurate name.
He's close enough to home that he could not pose as somebody from another part of the Shire. People would
Though
see through
wouldn't
that.
have Gandalf at least have been better off coming up with an aristocratic Hobbiton name that doesn't have relatives in Bree?
Right, I know.
Because that ends up being a real problem, doesn't it?
That's right, because there are Underhills in Bree, yeah.
Yeah. James, looks like you've got a little comment to join in here. What do you got?
Yeah, I was thinking too, is as the saying goes, the best lies have a grain of truth.
So, that's true too.
Yeah, if he's sometimes known as being, Mr. Baggins of Bag End Underhill, by using the name Underhill, it might be easier for him to remember it.
They're right. And that's the thing. It just needs to be something easy for him to remember.
Yeah, and Gandalf would know that. He knows Frodo, and he's a silly, foolish little hobbit, and of course he might easily forget. So pick something he might easily remember.
Easy to remember. That makes sense. That's a valid idea as well.
That is a good idea. And as opposed to, I'm trying to think, like, what would I use in a situation like that? Would you go with like your mother's maiden name or something like that would be easy for you to remember, but that most people are not going to associate with you. But then again, Frodo's mother's maiden name is a very prominent name. And so
Brandybuck.
And that wouldn't have worked. So that's interesting.
That really
That's a good
is.
question.
And leave it to Demay to ask a simple but incredibly deviously difficult question.
What do you think, Demay?
Demay, what do you think?
Well, I like the answers. I especially like James' comment. That was really nice. I'm one of those people who's really fond of Melkor. He was bad, simply bad.
Listen to her. That's great. Yeah. That's great.
So the best lies have a grain of truth to them.
That's
exactly.
That's right out of the Melkor playbook.
I think that probably really summed it up for me, that Gandalf's not a dummy.
No.
He knows the drill here, and just pulling that little bit in, it's far enough off, but not. What somebody says something like near but not in the mark. Who says that? Faramir? Can't remember.
You draw near but not on the mark, or something like. Faramir realized he was getting very near the truth, so he intentionally shot astray. He started following away from that line of questioning. Yes.
Yeah. That James's comment with your commentary just kind of. I think that Tolkien knew exactly what he was doing there. I always assume he does, but I always wonder why he did what he did.
Yeah.
And he knew his words.
That's a good thought. I'm thinking of it now from the perspective of Frodo having deniability. Hey, if I was really a Baggins, wouldn't I call myself something other than Underhill? Yeah. And a
little plausible deniability.
Right.
Proudfoot.
And that seems to me like the kind of shooting.
I'm Proudfoot here. Look at my feet. And everybody's going like, you don't talk like Proudfoot, dude.
I was adopted in the Proudfoot line. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
To clarify that quote, by the way, I was just pulling that up real quick, thanks to ebooks. It was Faramir, as we discussed, and he's saying that clearly talking about Isildur's Bane, and he doesn't yet know what it is, he's asking him questions about it, says it is a mighty heirloom of some sort, and such things do not breed peace among confederates, not if aught may be learned from ancient tales. Do I not hit near the mark? Frodo says near, but not in the gold. So there you have it.
There you go.
Wonderful quote. I can't wait till we get there in 4 years, 5 years. We get to my favorite character then. We'll get to Eowyn a little before that, but anyway.
Yep.
All right. Well, let's see. After James and after Demay, we had Emily.
We've got Emily next.
So, Emily, fire away. What wonderfully challenging question do you have that will stir controversy on our page for the next 3 months?
I haven't done that yet, though. I have to make that.
Come on, please.
A little bit harder about the question. Nah. I just do it. I'm just going to do an emotionally difficult question. How's that?
All right.
Wow. Are you ready for this one, Shawn?
Sure.
I was listening to the beginning, to you talking about at the beginning of Three's Company, talking about how Frodo's reflecting on the inscrutability of Gandalf. You talked about this being maybe the ring already at work, and I just kind of thought as I'm listening to this, well, maybe, but maybe it's simpler to think that he's terrified, and he's just and I've been thinking about the book and listening to it, reading it, remembering. I don't remember a lot of emotion being discussed, like especially a lot of terror, and I think about what Tolkien faced going into war, and how very human, like at the very core, terror is, and fear, and interesting,
primal.
Interesting that Peter Jackson was the director of the films, and he comes from a horror background. And even there's not a lot of overt talk of fear in the book. It's much more, I find it,
it's between
it doesn't
the lines,
grab you. It is between the lines. And I think that, I wonder what it would be like to look at the entire work, with that idea that underneath this, like, imagine anybody going through this, and the kind of fear they'd have, and how you talked about the writer, the first time we see a writer coming to talk to Gaffer, and you can only hear Gaffer's part of the conversation, and why would Frodo not go and find out what was going on? I mean, clearly this is something he should know, and there's something inside of him that knows he should be curious about it. But think about when you're looking at the huge shadow on the wall, you don't know what's really casting it, and you don't want to turn the light on. Or the worst part of being frightened is
you're afraid
opening
of the answer.
that door.
Yeah. Right.
You don't want to see. You want to run away from it. So I'm just.
Yeah.
It was fascinating to me to think of what about approaching the whole work from looking at that thing that's got to be underneath everything. I mean, we're in war, horrible things are happening. And where is that in the writing? Why isn't it in the writing, or where is it hiding in the writing? And especially it's interesting looking at talking about Tom Bombadil, and how that's a relief, talking about Gandalf encouraging Frodo to go to Rivendell first, so you go to the unknown, but you don't jump right into the belly or the mouth of the beast.
Right.
Anyway, what are your thoughts on that? That
you're not ready for
fear,
that yet. Yeah.
The fear as kind of an underchord in this whole thing that really maybe isn't quite so obvious, because it's so heroic, but in order to be heroic,
it
you
is.
need to fight.
It's more of an undertone, but you're right.
It's an undertone until it's explicitly used as a weapon, like when we see with the Nazgul, in upcoming chapters, upcoming episodes that we've already recorded but haven't been released yet.
Right, right.
But it is so between the lines for most of it.
It is for the most part. I mean, I can think of a few other moments. I think the first moment when you mentioned Tom, my thought immediately went to the time in the Barrow when Frodo was chilled to the marrow, and that he had dread in his heart. He was absolutely terrified, and who wouldn't be in a barrow and seeing your friends on the table, and here's this, detached arm groping and walking on its fingers. I mean, this is flat out terrifying, nightmare-inducing stuff. And I think we sense the fear a lot in that chapter, but I think part of
because
it
it's acute fear of something tangible that's right there, an immediate threat.
Exactly, it's immediate threat,
an immediate terror. Whereas, what Emily's alluding to here, I think, is just sort of the
undercurrent,
the undercurrent of constant dread of just knowing that you're going off on this journey, you're going off to war, as it were, and you may not come back alive. In fact, you don't expect to.
You don't expect to. That's right.
And maybe because we read so many fantasy novels, we watch so many heroic movies, and we're so used to heroes who step up and act heroic,
right?
And so we don't look for that in Frodo, but maybe we should.
It's there. We should.
Yeah.
I mean, I think one of my very first Prancing Pony ponderings was on that moment in the Barrows, and it was specifically in response to the idea of Frodo being courageous. I think I probably couched it in the context of how disappointed I was in Jackson's portrayal of Frodo as not being particularly courageous. I think of the moment when Frodo stands up in the stirrups at the flight to the ford and tells them to go back to Mordor. Now, it was utterly useless for him to even try that. That's when the Witch King stands up and breaks his sword with a word. Talk about power. That's a fearful moment. And fear, the most courageous somebody is not when they don't feel fear. It's when they feel fear and they still do the thing that they need to do, right? I mean, that's what defines courage is there has to be fear present for somebody to be courageous or brave. And I think we see that there. We'll see it at a number of points, certainly in Mordor. I think of Sam when he believes Frodo to be dead, and he is just absolutely, on the verge of despair. And then, of course, there's a lot of fear there, fear that he'll make the wrong decision, that he'll do the wrong thing. But you're right. For the most part, it is something that's consistent and should be there all the time. And it only kind of pokes through
every moment
from moment to moment.
Every moment of this journey, he's feeling this fear right up until the end. And we see the moment of relief after the ring is destroyed. But
we do.
But it's never really articulated exactly. The fear that was weighing on him from the beginning. I think that's an incredible observation.
It is, and it's something that we probably should need. We might need to kind of look at that as we put together the episodes. Kind of think, okay, what would that fear look like right now? What would he be? What thing would he be most afraid of at this particular moment, or what would he be concerned about? Moving forward with these things. Emily put it right in the note. She says existential fear, and that's what we're talking about.
Yes.
Consistent, always on, for his very existence. Not that something's going to happen not that he's not afraid of one particular thing.
Not that something is right. There's not a Barrow White right now. There's not an orc standing over him right now. It's just this existential fear. Yeah. I love that.
Boy, that really is a good question, and I think it will probably change the way we look at future episodes a little bit.
I think it will, and I think what I think is really interesting about this question is. Over the last couple of episodes, we've gotten feedback from a few different listeners, and I think some people have said that we're not giving Frodo enough credit. We'll point out where he's making a mistake or where he's being foolish, where he acts against Gandalf's advice and things like that.
Right.
We've got other listeners who say we're kind of giving Frodo too much credit. We're talking too much about how wise he is.
Well, we must be doing something right if we're getting complaints from both sides.
Both sides, right? And I think, to me, I'm always thinking about just how wise Frodo is compared to the other hobbits, how exceptional of a hobbit he is. But then that raises all sorts of questions about but he does fail at the end of his quest and things like that. And I just think it's really interesting that maybe in trying to think too highly of Frodo, maybe we are ignoring the fear that the very real, natural human fear that he must be feeling all the time. And then I don't know that I really don't feel like we're being too hard on Frodo. I know a few people have said it, but maybe at times, but I don't know. It's just very interesting that we're kind of seeing Frodo from all these different angles. And the truth is he's just such a human character. And
he really is.
Just really neat to me.
He really is. That's going to be it's going to be interesting to see how we filter things through that lens a little bit. We'll see more of that. Of course, this, just to be honest with you all, we're actually recording this one a little bit out of order. So you'll hear this episode before you hear our episodes on Shortcut to Mushrooms.
Yeah.
But those episodes have already been recorded. So you'll hear some, I think, in that, because, we have the encounter with the Nazgul again, and that's worth talking about. But maybe
and we'll
going
talk
forward
about fear
after that.
there, but again, it's sort of that acute fear of something that's happening right now, as opposed to, that gnawing.
Yeah, I wonder if that existential fear is present yet. In other words, is he still sort of coming to grips with what he's got to do, and maybe that existential fear doesn't really start to raise its head until he accepts the task after the Council of Elrond and realizes that he is going to have to be the one to cast it into the fire. Because at this point, he's not thinking that.
If it's not to that degree that it's at after the Council of Elrond, I think there's still
that's true. Yeah.
There's still there's fear and regret, I think, and sort of remorse at leaving the Shire. He says a few times he's going into exile. He doesn't think he's coming back. So
No.
there's that existential fear, if nothing else.
Yeah. Well, and then there's truly an existential fear about his very existence after he gets stabbed by the Witch King on Weathertop.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, there's a fear that he carries with him all the way to Rivendell.
Yeah,
So.
that's a good point.
Well, good stuff, Emily.
Really cool question.
Yeah, that really is, as always, a good question. Do you want to have any last word on that?
I mean, I appreciate you.
That's a totally valid answer.
Yeah, well, maybe yes. I mean, yes. There's a lot to talk about, but in this moment, no.
Okay.
I'm glad that you found it interesting too.
Yeah, very good stuff. Well, thank you for what we think is an incredibly insightful question, and something that will kind of rephrase the way we look at things, or reevaluate a little bit.
It will leave a lasting impact on
it certainly
coming
will.
episodes.
Well, we've got sadly we have lost Chris. He disappeared and then he came back, and he disappeared and came back. He was obviously having some sort of connection problems. I feel terribly that he's gone. I wanted to say one thing, and I was hoping he could be here when we said it. I wanted to share with him the tremendous feedback we've received from his North Wing segment that just aired recently, in regards to the story that he told about his great aunt recording the Lord of the Rings, on cassette tape for him to listen to. And I'm so sorry that we wouldn't be able to touch on that a little bit more, perhaps, during the time that we had him here, but maybe we'll be able to get him on next time and talk more about that. But
here's hoping, because that was an amazing story. And, I think it's my new favorite Tolkien discovery story, and it's just so great. And we've gotten such tremendous feedback from listeners.
Really have. I know it brought tears to my eyes just hearing it.
Definitely.
And thinking about the love that she must have had to put together such a project for him.
Yeah.
And it just is so moving. And we're so
over
glad
a very long time, if I
people.
recall. It was, it was years, wasn't it?
Years. Yeah, absolutely. Amazing stuff. So,
and Chris, we're getting some feedback from folks in the chat room talking about how much they love the story too. So
absolutely.
Some of the folks here with us, who are still with us right now, truly loved it. So thank you. Absolutely.
So when you're listening to this, Chris, when it releases, know that you were missed, and we will look forward to having you again next time. In the meantime, we still are looking for Tim, Nick, or Ed. Which one of you wants to raise your hand first with a good question? Nick, that was fast. All right. What do you have for us, sir?
I want to start off with a little bit of a fun question for you. So,
okay. We like fun questions.
I thought you might. As a big Dungeons and Dragons player and DM for a couple campaigns now that I've run in Middle-earth.
Oh, fun.
I've had a ton of fun exploring some of the things that Tolkien doesn't get into, things like what happened to the Entwives and all these questions that spark these long, huge debates on various forums. I'm just curious, for the two of you, what is your favorite one, the one that you really wish Tolkien would have wrote more about, and what's your pet theory?
Oh, wow. Okay. That's an excellent question, Nick. That's going to be a lot of fun to answer. And so much fun that I'm going to let Shawn take it first.
Of course you would. The truth is, Tom Bombadil is the one that continues to fascinate me. I love that there's so much discussion and so much speculation on who or what Tom Bombadil actually is within the context of the story. And we've touched on why he's in the story, but we have purposely not touched on who he may be, or any of those things. And I know Tolkien's own thoughts on the matter. Tolkien said in one of his letters, not 144, I don't think, which we discussed earlier. I think there was another letter where he talked about, Tom doesn't require speculating about, and he's not improved by it, or something like that.
Right.
And so Tolkien, put him there as an enigma, and he wanted him to stay an enigma. He really didn't want people coming up with pet theories about Tom, and I'm not going to share mine, because if I do, it will be in an episode very soon. But Tom is my favorite one, just because it is such a big part of the Tolkien community. It's something that everybody wonders at some point in their Tolkien discovery. There are no answers. There will never be any answers.
No.
And it's good. I like that there are no answers. But I love that the question is out there.
That is a good one. You did not steal my thunder, thankfully. I kind of feared that you might. I wish, and I know that we've got the story now, but it's not the full, there is never going to be a full version of the Fall of Gondolin. I would love to have seen him write the rest of Tuor's arrival and the rest of that story. I see Tuor getting to the top of the pass. I see him passing that last gate and seeing the Vale of Tún Ladin before him and the city of Gondolin right there in the middle. And I want to know more. And that's, to me, the story that I would want. Again, I've read The Fall of Gondolin, and I know from the histories of Middle-earth what you can pull and what you can, put together and say this happened or that happened. But I wanted to see it the way it would have been written as a full story. I guess that's not really a mystery. I'm not sure that really answers the question, but
that's that. And I was wondering, is like, oh man, yeah, because that is a really good answer, Alan. Just like, because that's just like one of the stories I wish he had finished. I mean, like to me, there's that one. There's obviously that guy in the boat who had all the adventures that we don't really know about.
That guy in the boat,
that guy in the boat who turned into a star, yeah. But yeah, there's so many like that. When you start talking about it like that, there's so many.
Yeah, that's true. I guess that's really not saying as opposed to a mystery that is left unsolved, like the Entwives or like Tom, or I'm trying to think of some of the other ones that
the Cats of Queen Beruthiel.
The Cats of Queen Beruthiel. Thanks, Ed. That was in the comments, folks. Ed, and he's right. I think we would want to know that, but. Folks, I have to tell you, when we do this, there is a little chat window underneath, and our peanut gallery here constantly throws out comments.
They're constantly making us laugh.
They're trying to throw us off our game, I'm sure of it. But no, it's really well done. I guess if that doesn't really count as a mystery, and that's just more of an unfinished story, then what would be the mystery?
I'll allow that one as an answer. I think it's a good answer.
Okay, good. Because if not, the second choice would have been another. It would have been another unfinished story. It would have been the end. It would have been the Dagor Dagorath. I would like to have had him actually decide what happens at the end. Finally, once and for all. I don't know. It's not really a mystery. It's just another, man, I wish I'd gotten around to that.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of, about that one, my pet theory about the Dagor Dagorath is he decided that this was the past of our world, and the end.
So the end of our world will be the Dagor Dagorath.
Yeah. Or he just decided to replace it with, whatever he believed about the end of the world, whether it was, the Book of Revelation or whatever else. I don't know. That's my theory. Just because there are those things in like the Athrobeth where it hints at, it being very specifically a pre-Christian world. There are hints of hints of an incarnation and exactly.
Yeah, that's absolutely.
That is one thought.
No, it is. It's a good thought.
Another one that would be fun would be, here's a question I find myself asking all the time. Does Ælfwine have a place in the final version of the story?
Oh, wow. Yeah.
For those who have read the Book of Lost Tales and know that the original idea was that these stories of the First Age were handed on to by the elves to this Anglo-Saxon traveler, and he brought them back to England, and he founded England. And then when you read things like the inherent frame narrative in Lord of the Rings, and you read things like the Silmarillion is Mannish, it's actually Mannish versions of Elvish myths. I always think somewhere in the back of his mind, did Tolkien still believe that all this stuff was, was transmitted by Ælfwine? I don't know.
My goodness. There are a lot of things. That's hard to narrow that down. I'd have to say, what are my top 10? But yeah, good question. Good question, Nick. I really appreciate that. I realized earlier that I mentioned Tim, Nick, and Ed, but I'd forgotten Tim actually led off. So Ed, I'm going to unmute you, and now you're on the spot. You've got to come up with a question.
Yeah, wow. Oh, wow. Okay, I was going to ask about how to fight the wild wereworms in the last desert, but I think I'll put that off for the time being.
Maker hooks, Ed. You need maker hooks.
Maker hooks. That's exactly right.
That's right, yeah. So I wanted to ask you guys, I don't even remember whether someone has asked this before, but I want you to tell me some other author, doesn't have to be fantasy or science fiction or anything, but some other author who has affected your life, perhaps not as much as Tolkien, because you're only doing the one podcast, but some other author, fiction that you find really meaningful and recommend for us to read.
That's a good question, because recently we've been taking part in that 10 books challenge, right, Sean?
Right. Yeah, we both
or
did
as
the
you
10
called it,
books
the
challenge.
15 books challenge.
We
for
both
yours.
made it 15 books, and
oh no, I did
one
10.
of mine was 4 books. Oh, did you do 10?
Yeah, I just did 10. I was in too much of a hurry. That was by the time I decided to do it, we were like 4 days away from the finalization of our son's adoption, and I knew that once that hit, I was going to be done. We were, my wife was taking leave from work, and we were going to be with family, and that's just a few days before Thanksgiving. So I knew that if I didn't finish it by then, it was never going to get done. So I kept it at 10 books, and I was doing 2 a day to get that through.
I actually was trying to do three a day before I went on vacation for Thanksgiving. That was when I came out to California, with the family, and
we shot that live video at Disneyland that our listeners have watched.
That was a lot of fun.
That was cool.
But I couldn't get 3 out a day, 3 or 4 out a day, because I just had too much going on. But I did make it 15 books, my 15 favorite or 15 most influential books or something like that. And one of them was The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, so it was technically 2 books. So I don't know,
or 7 books if you want to be
right. Well, that's a good point too, but not 4 books, because it's not a
That's
trilogy.
right, not 4 books. So what would you say to Ed's question of which one of those, which author would be the one that you would say had the most influence?
It would be Frank Herbert, which is funny because
Dune.
I just made a reference to him a moment ago with the Maker Hooks. But the Dune universe is the one that is closest in my heart to Tolkien, and I really love the first 5 books of that, of the series that Frank Herbert wrote. There have been some that have been written by his son, and working from some notes that he left behind, but those just haven't done it for me as much. But the original 6 books of the Dune Chronicles, and really the first 5, are truly fantastic, and I even love the ones that most people don't love. So that's the one I think about, is like the 2 halves of my literary soul are Tolkien and Herbert. So
very interesting. I'm not surprised to hear that. I would have, if I had to guess, I would have guessed that.
I've talked about Dune so much on the show.
Oh yeah. I'm sure it probably won't come as a surprise then when people hear that. And this is a tough one, I have to say, because if we were including all the works, say fiction and nonfiction, I might say C.S. Lewis. But if we're limiting it to just fiction, then Lewis probably falls back to second place, or third place behind Tolkien, and Isaac Asimov would take his place as my...
I thought you might say Asimov, yeah.
Yeah, Asimov's Foundation trilogy, but also his other work, Nightfall, and his just foundational stuff with robots and the idea of artificial intelligence. He's not just an author, he is a futurist. The guy predicts the future 50, 60 years ago in a way that is mind-blowing when you look and see what he got right. It's pretty amazing. And to me, he's the most influential. And if I were to ever do another podcast on a piece of literature, it would be a Foundation Trilogy podcast. And it would be amazing. But we'd have like 12 listeners instead of 5,000. So
right. It's interesting you start talking about Asimov's other works, and I'm thinking about Herbert, and I will admit I have not read any of Frank Herbert's work outside of the Dune books. And I know he's got a bunch of other things, and I've got them. I've got a few paperbacks of some of his other works, and I've just never read them because every time I feel like reading his work, I just want to go back to Dune. So it's definitely not at the level of Tolkien where I just want to read every single thing he ever wrote, but yeah, he comes the closest for me.
Yeah. That's a tough one because there's so many that do. I mean, I know that with your 15 books and my 10 books, there were a lot of authors on that list that were influential. I mean, I may get more kicks out of reading Douglas Adams, but I can't say he's got a lot of influence, except maybe in the way I try to find funny things everywhere I look.
Douglas Adams had a lot of influence on me when I was doing more fiction writing.
Oh yeah. If I were to write, I'd probably write more like Douglas Adams than
when I was a kid and I was writing, like, kind of trying to write funny science fiction and funny fantasy, it was totally Douglas Adams derivative.
Yeah. Or a little Terry Pratchett here and there.
I honestly haven't read much Terry Pratchett.
Oh, wow. Well, you have to fix that.
I know. I'm like the one person on Earth who hasn't read Terry Pratchett.
Well, certainly the one Tolkien fan who hasn't read Pratchett, probably.
Probably so, yeah. Well, I read Good Omens, which is the one that he co-authored with Neil Gaiman.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Well, that was a good question, Ed.
Yeah.
I really liked that. That was a fun one. And you know what's interesting about all this is we've gone through everyone except for Chris, who couldn't stick around. And again, we miss him. We have probably at least 15, 20 minutes. So who has another question that they want to throw our way? And I'm seeing Nick's hand. Let me go ahead and call on you, sir. What do you have?
Yeah, I'm curious on what's your opinion for what power held the army of the dead in the world. I don't think that Isildur, he cursed them, but I don't think that he had the power to hold them here. So what power was that behind that?
Good question. Shawn, I know we touched on that real recently, but I can't remember the context. Was that in the context of
I believe we touched on that a little bit in our Halloween episode.
Maybe.
We had a Barliman's Bag question about
the oath and about
why did the curse work?
Right.
How is Isildur able to curse these people and keep them here as undead when, it's their destiny to go beyond the circles of the world after they die? How does Isildur's curse have that kind of force? And I think you speculated, Alan, that Isildur's curse had nothing to do with it, that Isildur's curse was just a curse, and maybe it had some, maybe it did something bad to them. I can't remember exactly how we worded it, but I think I thought maybe it was Iluvatar himself who said, well, we're going to do that because we want them here for the Third Age or for the end of the Third Age when they're going to take part in this battle. But then you said you had something else about maybe it was the oath that they swore that they broke, right?
Yeah, I'm trying to find my answer here. I had pulled it up. I think it was in episode 100.
I want to say, and while you're looking for your notes, I want to say your answer had something to do with the fact that they had sworn an oath, and the oath had likely invoked Iluvatar.
That's right.
They had sworn an oath of fealty, and they broke it, and so due to breaking it,
that's exactly right.
Yeah. How did it go?
You think about the oath that Feanor took and his sons, and how clearly the last two surviving sons realized that oath binds us. We're hosed if we don't. We're going to have the everlasting darkness upon us if we don't do this, even if it's a very stupid thing we're doing. I think that's what happens here. We get, and it's not explicit, but all oaths eventually call on Iluvatar for enforcement. He's the only one who can enforce such an oath. And what I talked about back in that, and it was a Barliman's Bag answer, and it was back in episode 100, which I think you were right, aired somewhere around Halloween. I think they were stuck because Iluvatar stuck them there. That is to say, he didn't allow them to receive the gift of men because they had cursed themselves by betrayal. I'm trying to think of how I talked about it a little bit more. Oaths are very real in Middle Earth. Here, in the real world, so to speak, the primary world, you can take an oath, and if you break it, nothing supernatural is going to happen to you necessarily. I don't know. I'm holding out the lightning rod on my forehead right now just for saying that. But the idea is that in theory, certainly people take oaths and break them all the time, and we don't see people becoming undead for that particular reason.
But in Tolkien's world, oaths have power.
Oaths have power, and I have to wonder, would they have become like wights, maybe like the Barrow Wights, who were men that are, like undead spirits or something? We'll see them very shortly. Even without Isildur's curse, I think that Iluvatar gave effect to the curse because of the fact that they betrayed their oath.
Mm-hmm. I still feel like there's an element of Iluvatar setting up the eucatastrophe.
Oh yeah, that too.
When Aragorn
or saying, "Oh, hey, now I have an army of undead people. I might be able to use these when it comes time to deal with the catastrophe."
Yeah, that could be too. Yeah.
Again, because they had free will, they're men, so their refusal to live up to the oath was not part of the music. It was part of their choice. And as we know, Iluvatar can take the free will actions of others and incorporate them into his plans, right? So I don't know. Let's go back to the verse, the couple of lines from that prophecy that I read in episode 100.
Okay.
I'm going to read them again to answer that question. This was a verse that Malbeth the seer in the days of the last king of Fornost had talked about. And he said that the hour is come for the oath breakers. At the stone of Erech they shall stand again, and hear there a horn in the hills ringing. Whose shall the horn be? Who shall call them from the gray twilight, the forgotten people, the heir of him to whom the oath they swore? And I think the only way that they could be freed was not because of the curse, but was by living up to their promise. Once they fulfilled their promise, then Iluvatar grants them the gift of men, grants them the gift of death. Yeah.
That's interesting.
So we've got an oath given to Isildur. They break their oath. Iluvatar punishes them. I kind of think it's maybe kind of the same state that Erfarazon and his men are in. Hanging out in that cave.
Probably fresher air.
Fresher air, for sure. Yeah. Yeah. But that would be my answer to that. I think it was Iluvatar himself, because he's the only one who could deny that. I mean, the gift of men is something that is given to men by Iluvatar. Only he could deny it.
Yeah.
And I think he denied it here implicitly because they broke their oath. So.
Yeah. And because we are not told that it is a summons. With elves, we know that after they die, their fae are summoned to Mandos, and so their spirits are bound to the world and or to Arda, I guess I should say.
Right.
Their spirits are bound to Arda, and so when they die, their spirits leave it, but they leave their bodies, but they stay in Arda, and then they are summoned to Mandos, where they live out their elvish afterlife, eventually being rehoused. We're not told
unless
that
you're
with men.
Feanor.
Unless you're Feanor. We're not told that with men.
No.
And so we're, although it's suggested that at least in some cases, I'm thinking of Beren, there is a place where men go to before they leave the circles of the world.
Right.
We don't really know for sure whether that's just Beren or whether that's all men, because he's the only one we see. But still, regardless of whether there's a waypoint in Mandos before they leave the circles of the world,
right.
It all seems to be an automatic
for men's souls. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's not a summons, you're right.
But it's an automatic process of some sort.
Exactly.
It's not something that they can refuse. It's not something that someone else could deny them. So if it is an automatic process, you're right. I think Iluvatar would have to be the one to put the finger on the gears and keep that automatic process from happening.
Yeah.
And there are times when we see that happen, besides just the Dead Men of Dunharrow. There's also there's Gorlam the Unhappy. He seems to linger.
And in that case, that's clearly Iluvatar allowing him to, essentially send that message.
Yeah, to send a message. Yeah. So there are times when that is done, and I think we'll never really understand the mechanism why, but I think that we won't understand the mechanism, but we can probably guess who's at the wheel.
Well, yeah, true that. Emily, you've got some input on this one. Fire away.
Oh, no, I actually had another question.
Oh, okay. Well, then before we move on, did anybody have any feedback on this one question before we take Emily's question? All right, we're good. Emily, okay, what's your next question?
I have a not deep question for you. Yay!
Yay!
I was actually so I've recently read Roverandom, which I thought was lovely, and it made me think of the Velveteen Rabbit. Of course, like real versus a real animal versus a stuffed animal. I noticed that the Velveteen Rabbit came out or was written before Roverandom. I don't know if there's any relationship between them. I also saw that this is just a side note that Minnesota Opera has commissioned a work that is based on the miraculous journey of Edward Tulane, which has also really made me think of Roverandom, talking about Edward Tulane as a China rabbit given to a 10-year-old girl, and you see kind of this China rabbit goes through all sorts of adventures and how, is he real or is he not real, and how the feelings he has, and that also kind of fit into that. I don't know. I just noticing kind of this greater universe of the animal that is a toy but is real, or is real but a toy. And what would you say about kind of, do you think that he had read the Velveteen Rabbit? Do you think that was his take on it? Do you know of other works that are talking about the stuffed animal versus real from about the same time period in the 1920s?
Mm-hmm. Well, Shawn, that's I haven't read the Velveteen Rabbit since
it has been a very long time since I've read the Velveteen Rabbit.
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing some Google searching.
I did confirm that was first published in 1922, and Rover Random was originally told in 1925. So that's accurate. Now,
so it would have been fresh
for a long time.
Mm-hmm. I don't know that I've seen anywhere anything that says that Tolkien did read the Velveteen Rabbit, but I don't know. I just don't know whether he did or did not.
I don't know.
It was Velveteen Rabbit was a British book, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was.
So it seems quite possible that he might have read it. He had children that probably would have been the right age to read a story like that, obviously, because he told them Rover Random, which is a similar story.
Right. 1922 is only 3 years prior to Rover Random, so appropriate for the younger of his children, certainly.
Mm-hmm. I'm thinking when we talk about toys coming to life, I also think of my spirit animal, Winnie the Pooh. That's a story about a young boy's fantasy that his teddy bear and all of his stuffed animals come to life. That was published in the mid-1920s as well.
Okay.
I wonder if it was just sort of a zeitgeist at the time.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know enough about like other children's stories or other toy coming to life stories to know for sure that this was a thing, but it certainly seems like there were a few stories of that type being written at the time.
We know that Rover Random was written in part to amuse Michael after he lost his favorite toy. So I have a feeling. So Michael would have been, let's see, if it was told in 1925, Michael was born in 1920, so he was 5.
Mm-hmm.
His older son, John, would have been 3 years older, would have been 8, but Christopher hadn't been born yet.
Okay.
Yeah, and Priscilla certainly had not been born yet either. So, written about a 5-year-old losing his toy, I think that's probably fair to say that might have been the impetus. Velveteen Rabbit would have had to have been in his consciousness, but
right.
I believe him when he says that the motive was, my son lost his toy, so I'm going to come up with a story about a dog that's like this toy.
Certainly, yeah. No, there's no reason not to believe that story. I think it's just a question of was he aware of other things that were similar? Did any of those influence it at all?
I think the only way I would know for sure would be if I would read both of those fairly close, in fairly close proximity. That's the only thing, and I really haven't. I can't say that that's something I'm familiar with. It's been so long since I've read the Velveteen Rabbit, probably in the neighborhood of 46 years. And it's probably been 5 years since I've read Rover Random, unfortunately. I just haven't had the chance to read it lately as we work our way through. It'll be something I read again as we tackle some of the non-Middle Earth stories, maybe in a few seasons. But I don't have an answer for that one.
As I'm just Googling, just like, hey, has anybody written anything about this? There is, I just found a reference to a book called, the title of this book is Toy Stories, The Toy as Hero in Literature, Comics, and Film.
Oh, there you go.
By an author named Tanya Jones. That might be one I'll pick up and read someday when I have some time. But it looks like that goes a little bit into Velveteen Rabbit. It looks like it talks a little bit about Rover Random. So, it's a good question, Emily. I don't know enough about the details of the Velveteen Rabbit to know what real parallels there are, but there's got to have been some sort of trend of just Toy Stories, Toy Stories.
That
Woody and Buzz. Of just these sort of toy coming to life stories. Maybe there's
You're a toy, Buzz.
You are a sad, strange little man. There probably was something, and maybe somebody who's done some research on this can tell us, was there sort of a zeitgeist about these toy coming to life stories, or were these just isolated incidents? I don't know. It's a very interesting question.
I think we have time for one or two more questions. What do you think?
I'm just amazed that we made it through that entire question and answer without me imitating Winnie the Pooh once.
Well, we can't have that. Shawn?
No. Yeah, we can. We absolutely can.
Oh, come on. All right, fine. You did it in the video that we did at Disneyland.
Think.
That's better than nothing. All right, DeMay, you've got a follow-up for us.
I emailed Shawn a while back about a couple of questions, and this one I don't think is going to make his cut, but it has to do with Tom Bombadil.
Okay.
Everybody's favorite.
Yep.
He goes, after he rescues the hobbits from the barrow, he gathers up all this, in quotes, air quotes, treasure.
Right.
And he puts it out there and he says, it's for elves and men and creatures.
Right.
I don't have the exact quote.
Okay.
To come and feel free to take it. He doesn't mention dwarves. So my question is he like Ali's little brother or big brother and is really irritated that Vater let him keep all the dwarves and I'm jealous and blah, 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 and etc.
Good question. Well, let's get to the actual quote so we can see the facts. We get, after they carry out Merry, Pippin, and Sam, Tom goes in and he's bearing in his arms a great load of treasure, things of gold, silver, copper, and bronze, many beads and chains and jeweled ornaments. Climbed the green barrow, laid them all on the top in the sunshine. Then he says, wake now, my merry lads, wake and hear me calling. Warm now be heart and limb. The cold stone is fallen. Dark door is standing wide. Dead hand is broken. Night under night is flown, and the gate is open. So then the hobbits wake up. They're all surprised. Merry had remembered. He'd essentially kind of placed himself in the mind of one of these men. He says, the men of Cardoom came on us at night.
I love that part.
The spear in my heart. And he's like, whoa, what's this? So then let's see, where do we get the actual disposal of the goodies? Here we go.
Oh, there it is.
This
okay.
is
free to all finders. Birds.
He bade them
beasts.
lie there free to all. Yeah, go ahead. I'm so sorry. Yep.
That's right. He bade them lie there free to all finders, birds, beasts, elves or men, and all kindly creatures. For so the spell of the mound should be broken and scattered, and no wight ever come back to it.
Okay.
Huh.
Well, he doesn't explicitly mention the dwarves, but he does say all finders, and he says all kindly creatures. Well, they're not creatures, so I think he means like all kindly animals. No wolves or.
You don't think they're creatures? Isn't a creature just a created being?
I think he means birds and beasts. Well, yes, in a technical sense. I don't think that's what he means. I think he's talking about. Well, he says bird. You're right. I don't know. Birds, beasts, elves or men, and all kindly creatures.
I mean, I'm sure that would include.
That would
other sentient beings like
other
ants.
sentient. I never think of people as being creatures.
No,
I mean, we
get
are.
that,
We're created beings. But
we're not seeing the world through Tom Bombadil's eyes either.
No, you're right. You're right.
I mean, maybe all kindly creatures includes other sentient
Dwarves,
beings
hobbits,
that are not
ants. Eagles,
the children of Iluvatar, or the original children of Iluvatar, elves and men.
Yeah, but only kindly dwarves.
Only kindly, I think that's important.
Which might eliminate some.
It would absolutely, yeah. I mean, we know that Durin's line were better than most, right? And there were some lines that, some of the seven houses were kind of more wicked than others.
Right. That's right. Huh.
That's interesting.
But I think the purpose here is, and I may be speculating here, but I think the purpose of his releasing the treasures, so to speak, is less in defining who it goes to and more in breaking the spell of the mound. And wow, that's going to require some really interesting insight when we get to that.
It is.
That's a good question to me, and I think we will explore that in serious depth. But it's Fog on the Barrow Downs, and that's probably the last episode of Fog on the Barrow Downs. Looking at the length of that chapter, that's either a 2 or 3 episode chapter. So that'll be a while.
But I think you're right. I think it's definitely he's doing it to break the spell, and the spell must rely on the greed or possessiveness of of the wight, or of who the person that wight used to be, in some way, because kind of making these trinkets free for everybody. Yeah. Maybe that's what releases that spell. I don't know. I mean,
that'll
maybe
be an interesting discussion, because I do have a little nugget that I found that we will be bringing in when talking about the Barrow Wight and its origination.
Oh yes, yeah.
Its source. And that's going to, I think, be a little bit revealing. So we'll hold off on it for now. But that episode will air, depending on how that chapter breaks down, that will air in early to mid-April. So it's going to be a little bit of a wait. In fact, oddly enough, we're actually going to have our next Q&A will come out before that. Our next questions after Nightfall even. But we'll hold on to that to May, and we will definitely be sure to explore that at more depth when we get to that moment. So that's exciting. That's going to be a really, really interesting project to research and to dig into. I'm looking forward to that.
Looking forward to it.
Well, I think we have time for one more short, really relatively short, not super short, but short-ish question. So if anybody has one last question, please raise your hand and we'll go ahead and get to it. All right, DeMay, you've got one more. What do you got for us?
This is a question about your son.
Oh, okay.
For Alan. I know each of you have a son and a daughter, but this is for Alan because I believe he's has been reading The Hobbit with you.
He has. We've been reading it kind of slowly. We only read it when he gets ready for bed on time.
And I'm wondering how that is going, simply because I am kind of a person who teaches The Hobbit as often as possible.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering how it's going with him.
Sure, I'm happy to answer that. Just a little background for those of you who don't know, maybe I haven't talked about it a bunch. We recently finalized the adoption for our son. He's been with us since he was a little over a year old. So he is going to be 7 in February. So he's been with us a while, and we have been reading The Hobbit, though we only read it when he gets ready for bed on time. So I'd say we probably read, sadly, once every couple of weeks at this point. It was an every night affair for a little while. He just couldn't keep up that pace. So, but the good news is he remembers everything. There was a long stretch beginning when school started through probably, late September, probably about a month, where we didn't read at all. And my wife was concerned we'd probably just have to go ahead and start over. And I was ready to do that because I thought, well, it'll help him get this stuff down even better. And he said, no, I remember what's going on. So I started quizzing him a little bit. And he really did remember. He remembered a lot of detail. He remembered all the things that had happened, the big moments. He remembered Gollum and the riddles. He remembered the wargs, though I think he just called them wolves. He remembered the spiders in Mirkwood. He remembered the barrels. He didn't remember the Schrodinger's dwarves inside joke, but that's okay.
That's probably for the best.
Probably for the best that my son's not that big of a geek quite yet. And then he even remembered, I said, well, okay, but what do you remember about where we are right now? Because we had just reached the doorstep. We were on the doorstep, and Bilbo had realized that was the door. And now what? That was exactly where we left off. And now, of course, we've gotten to Smaug talking and to, Bilbo running out with the singed hair, and now Smaug smashing the mountainside, and now he's off to go get Dale. So it's been going well. He listens carefully, and not quite 7 years old, he asks really good questions. I mean, spectacularly good questions, I think, for his age, paying very close attention and asking certain questions about why, or having me repeat a particular paragraph or line because he wants to understand it a little bit better, asking me what words mean and things like that. So he's been enjoying it immensely. I'm looking forward to being able to get into the Lord of the Rings with him, but I think there's so much more fear there and so many more scary moments that I'm going to wait a few more years, probably until he's closer to 10 or 11. Mm-hmm. Just not something I don't want my 7 or 8 year old boy having nightmares about the Nazgul. It's just, I don't want to deal with that, and I don't want him to deal with that. So when he's probably 10 or 11,
I think it's a harder story to understand for a child that young. I think,
the
10,
Hobbit's
11,
a simpler tale. Yeah. Good stuff. He really has enjoyed it immensely. I can't wait to have it finish and to talk to him about what the story meant to him. I really want to explore that, and I'll be sure to write it down and maybe even make it part of an episode one day, just so that we have it for posterity. So,
well, I'm going to jump in because even though I wasn't invited, I actually did. I did recently finish reading The Hobbit to my daughter, who's 4. She's just turned 4.
Yeah.
In fact, she was
much younger. Yeah.
She was just at the tail end of 3 when we finished reading it.
Wow.
And I did read it to my son when he was probably about 4.5, but that was a couple of years ago, and I don't remember it as well. So I'll talk about my daughter's reaction because it's fresher in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
She's very young. But they know that it's really something that I care a lot about. And so they both wanted to read it. I wasn't going to read it to her, but she kept on asking me to read it to her. And so I did. And she had some trouble with some of the language. There were some things that obviously some words I had to define and things like that.
Confusticate, chief among them. Confusticate. Try to explain that.
There's others, that, make a lot of sense to us, but wouldn't to a kid.
No.
But I will say that she had a lot of fun with the Gollum part. I think the Gollum part was the first part that I really could tell that she was paying attention. And maybe she liked the voice.
Maybe.
And she liked the riddles. She picked up on the rhythm of the riddles, and it was kind of sing-songy, and she liked that. But she knew. I mean, I was asking her, 2 days after reading her a section, I would ask her, if she remembered something that happened a couple of days before, because we were reading it every night. And she did. She remembered stuff as early as the riddle sequence. The spider sequence, she was definitely interested. I don't think she totally grasped it all, but she was interested. And then she would pipe up with funny things like, what, his nose is sticking out? Fun stuff like that.
It's amazing what kids latch onto.
Yeah, it is. And then by the time we got to Smaug, she really understood what was going on by that point. And she would be asking me questions about things that happened before. She would ask about what's coming next. Thorin's death was tough.
We haven't gotten there yet. Boy, that's really hard.
That's very, very young, I think, for a child to be exposed to, a heroic character.
Yeah.
Dying in a story. And so that was kind of tough, but my kids have experienced death at least through pets and things like that. So it's not alien to them. And that was, she came to terms with it pretty quickly, but, she loves it. My son, I don't really have as much memory of because it's been a couple of years, but both my son and my daughter now. So my son is almost 6, and my daughter is, like I said, just about 4. And they'll quote stuff to each other. They'll talk about Bilbo Baggins. They'll talk about Gollum, and they'll say "my precious" and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So it's
my son loves to say that.
So definitely a lot of fun. It was really rewarding reading it to a child that young. I look forward to the next time, and there will definitely be a next time, probably within the next year. So
yeah. One last little anecdote. My son, we were at Disneyland, and he wanted something, and I said, "I don't have any money." And you know what he said? "What has it got in its pockets, Daddy?" I'm like, you are kidding me. That was perfect. It was brilliant. It was like podcast perfect, But yeah, that's exactly who he is. He's very, very clever that way. Now, before we wrap up, we have one more rather unusual addition to this episode.
Yeah, that's right, Alan. So, folks, as you know, we record everything in this episode live. We don't add anything later, like we don't go back and add answers that would make us sound really smart or anything like that.
I'm tempted, but no, we don't.
After some of our ad-lib answers, it is tempting to do that, but we don't. It's our commitment to you. But tonight, we have made an exception to that.
That's right. Now, hopefully you remember one of our recent guests to the North Wing, Chris Bartlett. Well, he joined us for tonight's episode, but before we could get to him, his connection went down and he couldn't get back in.
Yeah, and that was really disappointing for all of us because he'd also experienced some technical difficulties joining us on our previous Questions After Nightfall. So we decided to reach out to him after this recording to see what we could do.
That's right. So this little bit that we're talking about now, this was recorded after the fact, but only so that we could get Chris's question into the episode. Now, here's what he had to ask. The question I was going to ask is as follows. We're beginning to see the effects of the ring on Frodo, especially in the presence of the Black Riders. This is going to be one of the major themes of Book 1. I think there's a useful discussion to be had about whether we think the ring has any independent sentience or simply acts as a focus for Sauron's power. I'd be interested to know what you think about this question. By the way, this is one of the topics we come back to on a regular basis in Corey Olson's class. As we only have 8 to 10 years to come to a conclusion, you can see the urgency to find an answer.
Yep.
Thanks for all you do, and I hope my technical fail does not impose too much extra work on you. Well, I can safely say, Chris, that any extra work is a pleasure, and we're glad to have you on the show, even if it is indirectly.
Absolutely agreed.
But as for your question, I'm going to let Shawn start out. What do you have for us?
Well, it's a really good question. And
maybe
it is something
too good.
I know, right? And it is something that I've seen come up a lot. In fact, I actually saw the same question come up on Facebook earlier this week. So if I sound a little bit more prepared than usual for one of these questions after Nightfall bits, that's why. Only because I have been.
Well, yeah, we can't lock ourselves in a vacuum, and
no,
no,
we're not.
But if it helps, folks, we are recording this only just a couple of days later, and we only got his email with that question yesterday, I believe. So.
Right.
We haven't been researching it. We haven't been doing our typical work that we would do for Bartleman's Bag answer. This is very much like the kind of answer we would give on a Questions After Nightfall.
This is as close to, on the spot
live
as we can get.
Yeah.
But it is a really good question. And, I probably think, I would say, I think we've probably have maybe even contributed to the idea that the ring does have sentience. We might have even said something like this. I can't honestly remember if we have. We've probably referred to things like maybe the ring having almost a will of its own. We talk about the ring has a certain kind of agency.
Right.
Things
I
like
think agency might have been the word we used. Yeah.
I hope so, because I think agency is a better word.
I think so.
But I mean, we see things like the ring slips off of Gollum's finger. The ring slips onto Frodo's finger. It's there are these times where the ring
does things.
It does things on its own. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. I know we talked about this a little bit. I don't think we dived into it much, but we talked about it in the context of Gurthang and the Troll's Purse, two other objects that we see in the Legendarium that Gurthang clearly has
something,
a will, maybe not the ability to act, but some sort of will, whether it's the will of its dark maker or something else. And the Troll's Purse, I think didn't we speculate that was kind of like just a really sophisticated car alarm?
Sort of, basically just some sort of a recording, a quote unquote magical recording,
exactly.
That shouts out something without really knowing, without being aware, without having any sentience, but it's just sort of an alarm. Yeah, I like that. Gurthang is an interesting case because, we do see with Gurthang, it was Melian who actually said when it was called Anglikel, that
the dark heart of the smith still resides in this, or something like that.
Yeah,
right?
That's right. I think that's
pretty
exactly
close.
it. Yeah, the dark heart of the smith still resides in it, and the smith who made that was Eöl, the elf.
Nice guy. That guy.
Nice guy. Dark heart indeed. Yeah. Truly a class act.
With a unique approach to dating, it must be said.
Oh. if dating you call it.
If dating you call it, that's right. Let me just suggest to nobody in the world to do that.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, I know. Creepy beyond creepy. Creepsville.
I still don't like thinking about that too much.
No, I don't either.
But go back to season 1, folks, if you missed our conversation on this before.
Yeah.
But I mean, if Gurthang is able to have some fragment of Eöl's will, the dark heart of its smith still resides in it. That tells me that there's some sort of fragment of Eöl's will in Gurthang. Does that mean the sword itself is sentient? Does it have its own? Probably not.
No, it's probably Eöl.
But it's probably a bit of Eöl in it. And so I would speculate that probably what we see with the ring is probably something similar to that, because Sauron as a Maya is greater than Eöl, who's an elf.
Oh, much, yeah.
And so maybe because he is a Maya, maybe the amount of his will that he is able to put into the ring is greater than what, an elven smith could do.
Well, he put so much of his will that he became fully dependent on its existence, its continued existence in order to be.
That's true. That is absolutely right. Yeah. I mean, Eöl didn't do anything near like, it's not like Eöl needed to have the black swords that he created in order to continue to live.
No, he was perfectly happy to sell one as long as he could keep the other. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a good point. I like that call out. The one thing that I have been thinking about for the last few days that, again, since a similar question came up recently on Facebook, the reason that I would say that the ring falls short of actual sentience is because even Aule could not imbue the dwarves with actual sentience.
Boy, that is an excellent point. That really is.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's totally central right there. You can make automatons, you can make things that can respond to your commands.
Right.
But you can't make things that truly think on their own.
Exactly. And they might have even been able to speak with Aule's words, with Aule's mind.
But only
and
if
I think
he commanded
they did, right? Because he was already teaching them language. But
right, he was.
But they're just sort of parroting him, automatons, as you said. And they didn't become truly sentient until Iluvatar intervened. And so
the secret fire, and yeah, you're right.
And so with that in mind, I think there's just no way that Sauron, who was subservient to Aule, was a Maya who was below Aule in the original hierarchy.
Right.
I just don't see any way that he could do that without Iluvatar stepping in. And
no,
I don't see Iluvatar obviously is not stepping in.
No, not on behalf of Sauron.
Right.
So the ring then is acting almost not so much in a pre-programmed way, but in I guess if it was an animal, we'd be talking about it like instinct. That would be,
maybe so.
It's responding because of how it is made. It's responding because of its nature. It's not responding because it's actually thinking through a process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
It doesn't, and it doesn't have self-awareness. It doesn't have the ability to reason out.
Right. If A,
it
then
doesn't
B.
have the ability to reason out fully. Okay, Gollum is not doing anything with this with me, so I am going to slip off his finger and try and get back to my master. It's not reasoning that out, but some part of it is making that decision, but it's as a fragment of Sauron's own will that he put into it.
Maybe a reflection of that. I like that fragment or a remnant,
a complex algorithm. Maybe, I don't know. Who knows?
Yeah, no, that's certainly not in a coding sort of way. But yeah, this is a device made by Sauron that has an incredible amount of power. Certainly more power than any object would have, and it's going to act, but it's going to act directly in accordance with its, for lack of a better word, programming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like the idea. I like thinking of it as programming in a way, very simple programming, but sort of an if-then kind of logic to it. But it's not making its own decisions.
No,
one could not persuade the ring to do anything other than act on behalf of its master as it always does.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, and it couldn't even act differently.
Right.
It wouldn't have the ability to do that. You and I both have sons of a certain age, and there's these introductory toys that whether it's like the coder pillar or some other coding sort of device where you program in, make a left turn, go straight, turn right, play a tune, and you plug those things in, you push the button, and off it goes and does its thing.
Right.
So it's doing something and it's acting independently, but it's certainly by no means sentient.
Right.
It's responding the only way it can respond. It's not evaluating the situation.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to do what it's going to do. And I think that's the case here with the ring. Agency, yes. Sentience, no.
I agree.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, we don't have the definitive answer. We're just two guys with a couple of microphones, and
we're speculating based on what we know of the text. And you look at it's somewhere greater than Gurthang, but lesser than what the dwarves ended up at with Iluvatar's intervention. It's somewhere in the middle there, and I think we got
way above. Yeah, who are you?
Right, exactly. As we're thinking about that, since you brought up the trolls, I'm also remembering there's some stuff in Morgoth's ring that we don't talk about too much, but it's about the orcs. Remember when Tolkien was playing with the idea later on of the orcs not being twisted elves, but all these other different possible origin stories for the orcs.
That's right.
And one of them was maybe Morgoth took beasts and sort of bred them to the point where they were intelligent enough to be able to speak, but all they could do was just sort of parrot things that their master had put into them. And again, it was sort of like almost like recorded bits that Morgoth had given them that they could say. And that was very late in Tolkien's life. He never really.
And it was one he abandoned. No, because it's clear he ended up landing on the men, I think, is the one that he really wanted. But
is that, I couldn't remember which order they were in, but
that seems like that's where he ended up. But, of course, it's not where he ended up in the published version, which is why we always refer to it as the elves.
But it was one possibility. And so obviously maybe we look to something like that as an example of how something like this could happen. Maybe, again, it's something pre-recorded or some bit of Sauron's own will that makes the ring act the way it does.
That makes sense.
That's my thought on it.
And I'm in accordance with you on that. I think looking at those other, are they sentient sort of objects? That's really and even people in the case of the dwarves. I think that's really the only conclusion we can logically draw.
Yep, I agree. Well, that was a good one. I'm glad we had a chance to get that in, and thank you very much, Chris, for working with us and for a great question. And folks, hope you like what we did with it.
Yep.
So now, I guess, back to the original recording as we wrap up the show.
My goodness, this is a fun one. I mean, they're all fun, let's be honest, right?
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. We had a good mix of deep questions and fun questions, and it was great as always. Thank you all.
Always, definitely. Well, again, thanks everyone for a great discussion. Thank you for joining us for Questions After Nightfall, and we hope you can join us again for the next one. Folks listening at home, we hope you will all join us again next year. That's right, we're going to be off for the last 2 weeks of 2018, but we will be coming back on January 6th with the first half of Book 1, Chapter 4 of The Lord of the Rings, A Shortcut to Mushrooms.
In the meantime, we encourage you to go celebrate the holiday season with Tolkien and the Prancing Pony podcast by revisiting our newly retitled and evergreen PPP holiday event, the Father Christmas Letters.
Now, that's the rerun that we recorded a new intro for last year, and we edited it so that it will always be relevant, no matter where you are in listening to the series on the show. You'll find that as an unnumbered episode, slotted in between 63 and 64 back in Season 2.
Now, we won't be putting that out on the RSS feed again, but we do want you to enjoy a little holiday magic from us here at the Prancing Pony podcast. So we'll be sure to post links to the episode on all of our social media channels.
Go check that out around Christmas time. If you're a dad in particular, you'll feel woefully inadequate, but it's still worthwhile.
That is why we called it Father of the Century, because there's no way that any of us will ever measure up to just the tremendous amount of work that Tolkien put into entertaining his children in general, between Rover Random and writing all the Father Christmas letters. And
for anybody fortunate enough to have attended the Bodleian Library exhibit, you actually will have gotten to see some of that stuff in person, the actual envelope and letter. One of the letters that he'd written to his kids. It was absolutely fabulous. But
that's
anyway.
So cool. I hope to make it up to New York to catch that.
Yes.
But, I was only going to say that I feel proud of myself if I can make my kid care about The Hobbit, let alone writing something like The Hobbit for my kids. But
there you go. Well, as we said in the beginning of this episode, if you'd like to get in on the next Questions After Nightfall, be sure to visit patreon.com/prancingponypod. When you join at the Gift of Gondor level or higher, you're going to get access to exclusive content like the full-length bonus episodes every quarter, and short postscripts to each of our chapter-based discussions.
Now we're right around the corner from our next goal of setting up a Discord server, which is going to give our patrons a chance to listen in live during recording. There's going to be plenty of opportunity to laugh at our mistakes and our bad jokes and get a sneak peek at an upcoming episode. And if you're in the market for a new Tolkien book, please check out the official library pages at our website, theprancingponypodcast.com. where we've put together a set of links for our listeners to all the Tolkien books we've ever mentioned on the show. And finally, if you wouldn't mind posting a review on iTunes, we'd really be grateful for that. I say this all the time, but that increases our visibility, and that means more listeners, more questions for Barliman, and more discussion on social media. Just all the aspects of this Tolkien community that we're trying to build here.
And one of my favorite parts of that is more people to correct Shawn. But
always, yes.
Okay, me too, every now and then. And folks, we would really appreciate you sharing us on social media. That's how we build this community, one of the ways we do it. Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, wherever you hang out and might find Tolkien fans, tell them about our show. Well, folks, that wraps it up for another episode of the Prancing Pony podcast. Happy holidays to you and your loved ones, and we'll see you again in 2019.
Thanks again for listening, and thank you for making our common room on Facebook such a fun place to spend time. We want all of you to be a part of the conversation, and it does not stop when the episode ends. You can see the comments, the questions, the corrections, and more on Facebook at The Prancing Pony Podcast, on Twitter at Prancing Pony Pod, and on Instagram at Prancing Pony Pod.
And as always, a very special thank you to our patrons at the Kierdance contribution tier, a couple of whom are with us tonight. DeMay in Alaska, James in Virginia, Tamsin in Minnesota, Emily in Texas, and Chad in Texas. Thank you all.
Make sure you don't miss any episodes of the Prancing Pony Podcast by subscribing to the show through iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app.
And one last thing, as always, don't forget to send your thoughts, comments, and most of all, your most interesting, easy questions, because now you know what the hard questions do to us, to Barliman at theprancingponypodcast.com, and we'll try to get him on our next show. Well, however long we've had, it is still far too short a time to spend amongst such excellent and admirable listeners. But until next time,
farewell, friends.